Hi, welcome to React Holiday Season 2, Day 3. I really applaud your stamina. I know that if you've gotten this far, then, you're basically set. Like, you're going to have enough momentum to just keep going along. Anyway, I'm sorry that this video and email is getting to you a little bit late today. I was going to record last night, but we just had one of those perfect opportunities where the grandparents wanted to hang out with the kids, and so we ended up going to dinner and doing our Christmas shopping. But we got it all done, so I don't have to have that hanging over my head anymore. So it's just all you now. Today, we're going to talk about suspense. But just like yesterday, I'm going to try to wrap up some of the things that we talked about yesterday and kind of close the chapter on lists and things that we need to know there. And and then in the second half of this video, we will talk about suspense and go through everything that we're going to go through today. So one of the first things, and someone called me on this, and so I wanted to go through this, is that if you were following along with this example, chances are that you probably saw this error. Now, it's saying that let's see, I'll just read it. Warning, each child in an array or iterator should have a unique key prop. And so anytime we do what we have done here, where we are effectively creating an array that we're giving to this UL component, an array of these Pokemon list items, in order for it to do all of the tracking that it needs to do, if we were to add or remove things, when React does its diffing, it's good practice for us to provide it a key so it knows that this element, even if like the name is the same as other ones, is actually a different thing. So it doesn't remove the wrong one. Now, in our case, all of the names are going to be unique. We know that by virtue of us having them being Pokemon. None of them have the same name. However, if you had an app and you have a bunch of customers and this is just showing their first name, it's very likely that some of those names would be duplicated. Now, if you have an API that has an ID that comes along with the data, that is going to be great. That's always going to be the best thing that you can have. In our case, the API that we will eventually be using actually doesn't have that. It has a URL, which is unique, but also we know, because these are Pokemon, that these names are going to be unique no matter what. So in this case, because I know the data that I have, I can just give it a key for each element, and that'll just be item.name. And I'm not exactly sure why this is still item, so I'm going to call this Pokemon. Okay, cool. So I've changed all that, and now it looks like that only shows up after a refresh, at least on my machine. So now that error goes away. So when you see that error, that's how you solve it. You need to give it something unique, though. So know your data. If you have an ID, that's always best. But yeah, just try to use something that is unique. So that solves that issue. Something that I wanted to show, I wanted to just kind of go through a couple of the other array elements that you could do, which is really fun. One that I use a lot is concat. And concat is pretty cool. It allows you to basically merge two arrays. And so you're always going to give it an array, and it's going to add a value onto it. So if I had another one, I can't remember another Pokemon. My son's favorite right now is Xerneas. I think that's how you spell it. But if I wanted to add this, I'm going to have to add it into an object because that's the way the rest of the data is. Oop. Okay, so if I was in a situation where I just needed to add, I wanted to add something to the end, I can use concat to just merge another array onto the end of it. And now there's also another syntax that's a little bit more of a modern syntax, which allows you to do this with array literals. So if I just create a new array and I spread out the character data array over it, I can then just put another value on there. So just do my same thing with name, oops, Xerneas. Did I spell it right? I never spell it right. Anyway, so I can do that. Now, one thing that's cool about this syntax is that I can pull this off and put it onto the other side. I got that extra comma in there. Yeah, so now I can put that at the top if I did everything right. Nope. Okay, cool. So now I've inserted it into the top. So yeah, so those are some things that you can use the kind of new array syntax for. Let's get this back to the state that it was in. Another thing that you can do is you can do filter. So we'll filter this collection first. Filter is also a higher order function, so it requires that we take a function, a like comparative function. So we would take, again, the Pokemon, and we would do some type of evaluation on it. So say Pokemon.name not equal Pikachu. So anything that doesn't equal Pikachu is going to pass through, but Pikachu is going to get filtered out. Now, if this is something that we use more than once, which is always a possibility, we can take this and assign it to a function. So we can say like without Pikachu. And this is a really terrible example, except that it kind of illustrates something that you can do. So we'll paste that up here, call this let without Pikachu. I spelled that wrong. Perfect. So now we're using filter, but we're using this function. Instead of having it in line, we can kind of, instead of duplicating that somewhere else, if we were to kind of often need to filter out Pikachus, we could do that. So anyway, if you want to do more, so like right now we have a filter and a map. If you had wanted to, you can also use a reduce, which is basically a filter and a map together. I'll leave that as an experiment up for you. I find that the syntax is a little confusing personally, and I can never do one without looking it up. So anyway, if you want to try out a reduce, feel free. I am going to just kind of get back to the state that we were so that we can talk about suspense. So we are done now with day 2, and it is time to talk about day 3. Now I've forked this and made a day 3 project, so it's available at this URL, which will be in the email. My goal is to hook up suspense with all the pieces that we need to make suspense work. Now, I know that you might follow along and feel like you are totally lost. And what I want to say is that that's fine. Because what we're going to do is we're just going to put all the pieces out there. And then over the next few days, we will actually talk about what each of those things does. But for today, suspense is just very hard to, there's not a way to kind of like incrementally add certain things. So you kind of have to just insert it all, and then we'll talk about each piece. I wish that there was a better way to do it, but really suspense, when using suspense for data, it's like a whole thing. We're like adding a whole like data management layer to our React app. So it's not really something that we can kind of like easily like dip our toes into. We just got to dive in and figure out how to swim afterwards. But absolutely, I will be covering each of these things in more depth in the future lessons. So stay tuned. First of all, what do we need to know? So first things first, we need to add a new package. I've already done that in this code sandbox. So let's see. So we had React and we had React DOM. I've added React Cache, and it's pretty simple. I just hit add. I can even add it again over it. React Cache. Now it defaults to this latest right here. But I am going to use this like canary build of this. That's the one I'm going to use. I'm going to use like the latest one that they're working on. And that's kind of tied to different versions of, it's tied to the version of React. So That's the one that I'm going to be using. We can close this up. Now, if you go on to NPM and you search for React Cache, this is what you're going to find. Now, this is for the 2.0.0-alpha.1 release. And so what we want is to find these versions, and we're on this canary right now. So this is the actual version that we're working on. It has links to GitHub and all that kind of stuff. But as you can see, like, this README is totally unhelpful because honestly, you really shouldn't be using this at this point. It is totally unstable and doesn't have features requisite for building an app. This is very exploratory, and you're not going to have a lot of support out here. But you should know it's coming down the pipe. We're here for exploration. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to use React Cache. So I've already added it as a dependency. I need to import it now. Now, one thing that I often do is, so I'll do import star as React Cache from React Cache. Now, when I'm using a package that I'm totally unfamiliar with, sometimes I'll just import everything. And so this star means import all of the like named exports, default exports, everything as this variable from React Cache. And what I can do from there in a lot of packages is just log out React Cache and kind of see what's in there. Okay, sorry, a little bit of a hiccup there. We're all back on track now. So I log this out, I import everything and I log this out. So we had create cache, we have create resource, and React Cache. This is the like default. So what we want to do is now what we're just going to pull in exactly what we want. So we'll say we'll take in create cache and what was the other one? Create resource. Okay, great. Now, the first thing we need to do is we need to create a cache, and that's as simple as let cache equal create cache. Okay, we're using this function that we created. Actually, we gotta invoke it. So calling this function, just making a simple cache. Perfect. Again, you don't have to understand what all this means. Now, the next thing that we need to do is we need to create a resource for data that we're interested in. So we'll say let Pokemon collection resource equal create resource. And here we're going to give it a function to call to collect that resource. Okay. Now, what I'm going to be using here is this Poke API, which has a ton of Pokemon data, specifically just this Pokemon resource endpoint, where it just returns an object with a results property, which has an array of all of the Pokemon. So we'll take that URL, and that's what we're going to use. So we'll use fetch for this, if I can spell it. And we're going to just give that the URL there. Now, we still have to do all of the regular stuff that we would do with fetch anyway. So we'll take the response and we'll call .json on it. And we should be good to go. So now that resource should have the object that we get back from this API endpoint. Perfect. Give ourselves some more space here. Now, in what we render, now we're going to make a couple of changes. So instead of using this character data, we're going to remove that, and we're going to read from our resource. So Pokemon collection resource dot read. We give it the cache. And then we need to drop one layer into results. And that's just a virtue of the API that we're using. It doesn't give us the bare array. We have to go into results. So we have a little bit of a problem right now. I didn't type this right. That should be then. Okay, perfect. So we're getting an error that's basically saying like, hey, you need to start using Suspense if you're going to be using these resources. Okay, so this is good. App suspended while rendering. Okay, cool. So this suspended the rendering, but no fallback UI was specified. Add a suspense fallback component higher in the tree to provide a loading indicator or placeholder. Okay, cool. So naturally, I would think that could just do this here. We could do react.suspense. My typing is horrendous today. Fallback is just going to be some generic loading. Close that up and wrap this here with React suspense. No, go away, Siri. Okay, so the odd thing is that we still get the same message, which is kind of confusing because I think like, okay, well, I read this and I did exactly that. I put it higher up in the tree. Unfortunately, anything that we suspend needs to have a component boundary around it. So we need to actually remove this from our application render and put it in its own component. This is something that you're going to have to do with Suspense. And it's going to feel weird at first because we're used to kind of like separating concerns where we have like the UI and the data like not really knowing about each other. And so this is something that felt really weird for me as I started learning this, but it'll start to feel more natural as you get more comfortable with Suspense. So if I can get back in here, Pokemon, we'll call this Pokemon list. Pokemon lit. Okay, and we're going to go up here and we're going to create a new function, define that, Pokemon list. And this one, we're not going to take any props on. So we'll paste this component, return, save that, and it worked. And it's pretty quick. I don't know if you saw the flash, but it does show that loading. So we have our React suspense. I'll try this again. It'll flash right here. Loading. You see it real quick. You might even miss it with the video, but it does happen, which is really awesome. Now, if you've ever tried to implement all of this before, you know that it takes way more code than what we wrote here. And now I can delete this because we're not using that static data anymore. So this is really amazing. We haven't had to write any code that kind of checks to see like whether or not the thing is there before we render it and how we render a fallback in the case that it's not there. All of that has been taken care of for us. So this is really amazing. So just as a recap, I want to go over the things that we went over. So first of all, we had to in our project, this one, I always click the wrong tab. We had to add React caches as a dependency, and this is the latest version of this. Okay, we then import from React cache, create cache, and create resource. If you wanted to just import these all together as one thing and then call them, through whatever you say, you can, whatever. It's up to your preference. But I pulled them off individually and use them. So we create a cache. Okay, step one. Step two, we create a resource. And then we just give it a function that fetches and kind of transforms that data as we need it. Okay. Step three, we then go down and we use our resource by calling like Pokemon collection resource.read. We use that read function and we give it the cache that we want to like read to and from. And then we just kind of go into that object and map over it the way we were before. The final step is that we need to wrap it in a suspense component and provide a fallback. And we can give anything that we want here. This could just be text if we wanted to. We can give it a React element. We provide that fallback and then we render our thing. Now, critically important, this has to have a component boundary around it. So we can't just kind of leave that in line or we'll get the same error. So I guess the final step is that we then had to pull that out into its own component. I know that is a ton of information. And today, just get familiar with it. I just want you to kind of do all the parts, try to repeat it a couple times, and then we'll talk more about resources. We'll talk more about caches. We'll talk about this kind of like component boundary and how to, all that stuff is coming up. So I hope that you were able to hang in there today. I know that this was a lot, but think about all the code you're not writing, right? Like this is pretty concise for all the stuff that it does. So you're doing awesome. I'm glad that we get to hang out together. Again, hit me up via email or Twitter if you have any questions. I'm happy to answer them. See you later.